The first thing I think we need to create sort of like glowing orb for this flower. The line is already kind of hinting that it's glowing, but not so much yet. So this is the layer that I added with the same color as the dress. But obviously we need to tone down the opacity so we can actually see the flower. And now with this framing, the flower is getting more attention than before as well. As you can see, I also added some gradient to the knees and the hands where it's usually a little bit more red in the human body. So it just feels a lot more flashy than before. And now we can go ahead and can make a new layer and then put it into a new group from this layer, secondary shapes. I always title them. I like to keep my file sort of organized because that way when I right click on something, the title showed up, then I would know like what it is, especially when you have like over 100 layers, which happened with my work. So now we can really zoom in and then pretty much the same thing as our flats before. And we can still use our magnetic tool or other lasso tool to create secondary flats. And with the secondary flats, I'm just gonna, at this point, use placeholder colors as well. I'm gonna just clean up the selection. Right here. And then just creating more secondary shape. So you can tell this one kind of messed up. The magnetic got pulled away by another strand of line. So you can, when you press down Alt, the lasso tool become a subtraction lasso tool. So then you can correct your selection that way. Or you can press Shift and the lasso become a additive lasso. So it add to your selection. I'm gonna also do the secondary shape for the leaves as well. So again, new layer, put it into a new folder, secondary shapes. Another tool that I like to use to sort of get selection is just, quick magic wand. And if you click here, which is sample all layers, it takes all layers into consideration. And what it's doing is selecting that one area that's being surrounded by, different color. So if I don't have this on, it's sampling only this empty layer. So essentially it select the whole thing. But if I have sample all layer on, then it look at the image as everything, all the layer together, and it only select this part. And that's what I want. So I'm gonna make a bunch of quick leaf secondary selection. Whoops. See, here's a little gap, that's why it went over. So this part might not be that good for using a magic tool, which is fine. We'll go back in there with a lasso. And then you can just keep doing this until you feel like you have covered most of the secondary shape that you want to add like different color to. So at this point, I have selected all my secondary elements. And when I select, I usually have a general rule that I use. With the secondary element, what I want to do is create volumes within one bigger shape. For example, in this hair, where I think would be the highlight, I put a lighter color in, and where I think would be in shadow or concave, I put a darker shape in it. The same with the leaves, where I think it's hitting the light, I put a lighter shade, and where I think it's turning away from the light, I put a darker shape. It's just kind of rough, and you can tell it feels a little bit stiff, like she has plastic hair. So we're gonna like soften that and make it really feel like part of this bigger shape. And again, what I love to do is using gradient. So this is the highlight area. I'm gonna add the layer mask. So let's really think about how the hair behave in a three-dimensional way, right? Like around the root, it's probably gonna be going in and catching less of the light. So I think the highlight is a little bit too strong and can be softened here. And what I do is just to sort of erase that part a bit with the gradient tool. Same with the hair that's behind the arm. There's probably a little bit of a cast shadow going on. But I want everything like sort of soft at this point, so I'm not really gonna put in a cast shadow just yet. So I'm just gonna soften that by erasing part of that highlight so it's still seeing through our base layer, which is these two layers. Here, also you see by making this area darker, all of a sudden this part is popping out. So it's a lot of like push and pull, kind of like sculpting, you know, like you have the big shapes first, and then you get into the details, start chiseling the smaller moments out and making the piece more refined that way. So now I have all my secondary shapes in their happy place, happily blended with the primary shapes. I think it's definitely an improvement from where we come from, but overall I feel like it's still lacking some of that warmth of the light. So now we're actually going to actively change this color with those helpful adjustment tools that are available in Photoshop. So this is one perk that digital tool has that traditional tool doesn't. Like if you painted something, you can't just make a slide and make it into like higher intensity or shift it into a different hue, but we can in this world, so we're gonna take advantage of that. For example, here, I think I wish there's a little bit more warmth with these strands of hair compared to down here. So I'm going to get into the hair layers. Like see, I titled it hair details. I'm gonna go into hue saturation. Remember we talked about that very early on. So this is the tool that allows you to manipulate the hue saturation of the color you already have. And then you can just kind of like slide around to see like how, well, that's pretty cool. I mean, like having a purple highlight, but I think I'm going for something a little bit more harmonious. Loving the yellow, but it's a little too intense. So maybe not that much. Maybe let's say like a 15 and a little bit higher. So this allows us to shift the hue along on that color slider. This, I'm increasing the saturation a bit. And then that's the brightness. I think for the brightness, we can't just have it to be the same. And with the preview, this is what I use a lot, I find really helpful, is to compare the before and after. And that's so great at, you know, making decision. And I think it's an improvement, so I'm gonna go for it. I think overall the color does feel a little bit dull as well. So I'm going to the background and kind of up that as well. Giving it a bit more saturation. So now, see, compare it, feels a lot warmer. Yep. And then this is really fun part, is you can start going into your secondary shapes and then start changing individual colors. Now we click off sample all layers, so it's only sampling this current layer. I think this process can be more intuitive, like kind of what feels right. I mean, in some way, I'm just kind of like spacing things out for this image. So it looks like, you know, not all the leaf color change is at one place. Okay. So maybe it would be cool if some of the leaves is a little bit more on the blue side. Because I mean, if you really look at a plant, like their color is so complex and it's impossible to completely emulate that. But here we have changed just a few leaves and all of a sudden this tree feels like it has so much more color or just richness in color because I sort of space out the different blue leaves. And now I'm gonna go in with the lighter leaves as well. Again, sort of spacing it out. And then changing. I feel like why digital tool sometimes is so great for people who are not familiar with color because you can really see what is changing, even without really knowing the theory behind it. But then through this process, you are actually learning how color work. So it's almost like you're learning while you're doing it, which is really great. And then you can keep going with the rest of the little shapes.